What is a diasporan experience like?
It was a shock.
Identity is at the core of us. We cannot talk about parenting without understanding the backdrop that underpin that parenting.
We're getting more educated and losing our own essence.
If we cannot be proud of who we are, that leads to some form of dislocation with our own selves. Hello again, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you again today and to continue our discussions around Diasporan Mum, the podcast where we explore the experiences of parenting in the diaspora and where we try to build a bridge across cultures to provide a safe space where our children grow and thrive. So, today we're going to be talking about the Diasporan experience, because a really important thing to try and understand is, why are we doing this? Why is this podcast important? What is so unique about the Diasporan experience? After all, we all travel, we all go places. And I think it is important that we explore that experience of leaving everything that you know, going into a new place, and what that means. Part of why that is important is because it helps prepare individuals who may be embarking on this journey afresh, so they know what to expect. And I think if you know what to expect, oftentimes it makes the impact more bearable, because you know that you are not unique, that this is something that is to be expected, and you prepare yourself ahead and you plan how you're going to navigate that space. There may be people who are currently going through it who think, what on earth have I let myself in for? What am I doing in this space? I don't think I can thrive. I think discussing this will help them validate their experience, that they are not failures, that there is nothing wrong with them. So if you are there and you're watching today and you're thinking, I don't think this is working. I think I am the worst parent on earth. I don't think I can navigate this space. Hopefully, our discussion today will help you understand that you're not alone, that your experience is not unique, and that the challenges that you're facing right now and the feelings of dissonance that you feel right now is shared by a village, and that village can be there to support and reinforce methods, tools that we've all used to cope and survive in this space. But I also think that talking about the diasporan experience is also important for allies, because we all need allies. We all need support systems. As I said at the beginning of this podcast in episode 1, this is not just about my experience as a Nigerian mom or another person's as an Indian mom or father navigating the space. That what we really want to build societies that are truly inclusive, where we can draw on the strengths of one another. And one of the best places to start is understanding. Oftentimes, a lot of the conflicts that we have, a lot of the distress that we have, a lot of the distrust that we have comes from a place of lack of understanding, not being aware of the other person's experience, and therefore not being able to empathize and walk with them in that space. So for anyone who's never experienced the diaspora experience, who doesn't know what I want to talk about today, this is also an experience for you to get to understand some of the key issues or aspects of navigating the space in the diaspora. So for me, my experience was that I was born and I was brought up in Nigeria. I had my primary school, my secondary school, my first degree, my law school, all in Nigeria. I understood that space. And I knew what the norms were. I knew what was acceptable and I knew what was not acceptable. I didn't have to second guess myself. I didn't have to think. It didn't mean that sometimes I didn't challenge my environment. Of course you do, because every society needs challenging in order to become better. It didn't mean that sometimes I did not think, oh, well, my parents are absolutely wrong. There's no way I'm going to do that. But at least I understood what their expectations were and my reasons for not agreeing or agreeing with what it was that they wanted me to do. So, when I came to the UK for the first time, I came to study. And as I said, by this time, I'd been through primary school, secondary school, university, law school. I'd done national service. So, of course, I knew what a university was like. I knew what it meant to study. What could be so wrong? Plus, I'd watched TV. I'd watched the news. I'd watched soaps. I'd watched films. I'd watched dramas. So, of course, I understood the society I was going to go into. Boy, was I wrong. So, I first arrived to the UK on a fine September's day, and everyone said it was autumn, and I was told that the weather will be mild, and therefore if I put on a bit of jumper, that would be okay. A sweater, what some people call a sweater. I didn't just do that. I had layers of that, and I came into the mild September weather shivering. That was my first experience of culture shock. Absolutely unprepared for what I experienced. The next thing was that I had to then travel from my airport of arrival to my university. Until today, I really empathize with international students because not everyone realizes what it means to arrive thinking you know what is expected and then you don't. So, let me tell you how we navigate spaces when I was growing up in Nigeria. There were no Google Maps, there was none of this. So, where I grew up, if you wanted to go somewhere, you said, this is where I want to go, can you tell me? And people tell you, go straight down the road. When you get to the blue house, turn left. And then there'll be a palm tree somewhere. You get my drift. That's how we navigated spaces. I was handed a map, and that was it. Nobody told me to go left, go right, go nowhere. That was it. And then I arrived my room. In my entire life, I'd never used a heater. I didn't know what heating was because, of course, I came from the tropics. So how do I turn the heating on? And then later I understood that it was still too mild, so the heating was not going to be turned on at that point in time. But do you know what it feels like to be a full-grown adult, a lawyer, and not being able to operate basic equipment in your home? That is culture shock. That is a feeling like no other that you felt. And all of a sudden you feel really small and uncertain, not quite sure how to navigate that space that you're in. My next experience was going shopping. And of course, I knew what I was going to go and buy. I knew the food. And then I went to the shop and I wanted rice. And there were all these types of rice that I didn't know what they were. And I was thinking, which one should I buy? I ended up buying the wrong one, actually. And the list goes on, all of the different things that you experience and how you go on there. But what is really important is that in trying to understand this new environment that you've come into, you do not just face what I call the mild things from the day-to-day that you experience, but there are also bigger things that you have to face about yourself, who you are. Chimamanda said in her book that I did not know I was black until I went to America. That's Chimamanda Adichie, the well-decorated novelist, author, and writer. And that was my experience as well. I didn't know I was black. I knew I was a woman because in my culture, it was patriarchal. And the divide between men and women were clear. And I understood the challenges or the discourses around that. But I'd never thought of myself as a black woman. Black was not something that I had ever engaged with until I moved into this new culture. And the meanings around being black and the questioning around being black and where you're from creates a whole new space that you have to navigate. And so I started to discover things about myself I never knew. But also in navigating that, you're also losing things about yourself that you knew so well. And remember, you're doing this not as a child. You're doing this as an adult. And in a space where you don't have your village. So there was nobody really to call upon to say, hello, this is what I'm going through. Can you help? I come from a really large family, and my experience always had been there was always somebody who was going to be able to respond to my questions. From when I was trying to get into university, to when I was about to get married, to when I had my baby, there was always someone. And in this space, there was no one. And I remember that I resorted to buying tapes because it was also at a time when we did not have the easy access to communication that we now have. And I remember if I wanted to call home, first I needed to book an appointment for when I was going to call. And then I'll have to put these coins in one at a time. And you kind of hear it going clink, clink, clink. And you never really get to say what you had to say. And one of my coping mechanisms then was that I bought these tapes. I bought a tape recorder and I bought cassettes. And I will speak to them. Because that was my only way of trying to bring into context all of this chaos that I was feeling inside of myself. And to understand that I had come into study as a really good student, I had come on a scholarship. And then you go into the classroom. And one of the first experiences I had was everyone laughing, and I did not understand why they were laughing. And you kind of catch on 3 seconds or 4 or 5 seconds later when everyone stopped laughing, and you suddenly start laughing. And you look around and you look different. And for the very first in my life, I knew what difference meant. I understood what it meant not to belong, not to be part of the village, of the club, of the group. There will be references made to popular culture that everyone else would understand, and I wouldn't. And I felt for the first time stupid. And I would go back to my room and question myself, why was I so stupid? Why wasn't I catching on? But it was because I did not understand at the time that part of the reason why I was 3, 4, 5 seconds behind was because I didn't get the context, or what I didn't understand at all sometimes, to be honest, was that I didn't understand the context. I didn't know what had happened in that country 3, 4 years ago that was popular in the news. Now, if everyone had told me something that linked back to cultural experiences in my own culture, in my own country, then I would understand. But here I didn't. And navigating that space of newness, of identity, of process, of systems, of language, of identity, dressing. I remember putting on this really nice, beautiful dress on a Sunday to go to church, and arriving in church and looking really out of place because I was the only very colorful person there. I remember being asked at work, "Oh, are you going somewhere nice?" And I didn't understand. I didn't get it. I didn't know that the way I was dressed wasn't quote unquote norm for a formal environment, because back home, that's how I would dress. And it would have felt okay. So all of these experiences, and one more story I want to tell before I look at some of the data. This thing called personal space. I had never come into contact with that idea as a Nigerian. So I'll talk to people and I'll smile and I'll look at them right in their eyes. You know, I'll come up to them and I'll tap them on the shoulder. "Hey, excuse me." And after some time, one of the persons who took pity on me, I think, and in some ways who had, and I think that's why the village is really important, because this was somebody whose parents had also been immigrants in India. And she understood what I was going through. And she said, Ngabo, people like their personal space. And I'm like, what do you mean personal space? Because I wasn't like going to grab anybody or push anybody or whatever. I was just tapping them, walking close to them, standing by them. And she explained to me this idea of how many centimeters, I don't remember exactly what it was now. How you need to step back away from somebody, how you really don't touch people because not everybody feels comfortable. And for me, as a Nigerian who had grown up in a large family, in a large village of people, you hugged, you welcomed, you smiled. This was alien to me. And I had to begin to learn about space. I said that was the last story, but I'll say one more. Weddings. Somebody that I knew was getting married. And where I came from, if somebody you knew was getting married and they told you they were getting married, you were part of, you were invited, you turn up. And so I was having these conversations around, so when is the wedding and what's happening? Being really happy about it. And I think it suddenly dawned on them at some point that, this person is expecting to come for this wedding. And they didn't know how to tell me that I wasn't invited to the wedding. And anyway, eventually we kind of walked and like, okay, it was fine and all of that. But again, cultural shock. So I guess I've said all of those stories to show that in every aspect of your life, you are relearning your way of being. You are learning how to develop social mores that are acceptable in that environment. You are learning to question your own values and juxtapose those with the values of the culture that you're now in. You are finding yourself in spaces where you are embarrassed or that you find embarrassing. You are seeing yourself, as I said, in new ways that you never saw before. But also, worse off is that the things that you were most sure about, that gave you confidence, you're losing because they were not as valued or as prized as you thought they were or as you know they are from the village that you come from. And all of this is happening in an environment where you don't have the village to uphold you and support you. Where people look at you and think, oh, she's a bit weird, isn't she? Oh, that Ngobo, she was funny. Did you know that she was thinking she was going to come to the wedding? So, understanding that is going to happen, that you're going to be in a space where everything that you knew may not be as you knew it, or even the things that you thought you understood, because it's one thing watching things on social media, it's one thing watching things on movies, films, dramas, whatever, and living it. That is a whole new experience. And even today, I tell in people that for you to understand the diasporan experience, you need to live it. Unless you live it, you will not understand it. How you move from a place of certainty and of safety to a place of uncertainty and confusion. Now, there is a lot of data to support this idea that it takes time to acculturize to your new environment. There's an acculturation gap. And oftentimes, most people will feel this culture shock. The extent may be different depending on your background. Like I said, I came in green, no previous experience of having ever even traveled outside of my continent to come to a completely different area. So I'll just want to read to you some of the data around culture shock and how that has felt people. Here are a few data for you around culture shock. 70% of expatriates experience culture shock. 40% of international assignments fail due to poor cross-cultural adaptation. 40% of international assignments. And remember, these are assignments for which you have organizations that have a plan, a business case, hopefully support systems within those organizations, and yet they fail due to lack of or poor cross-cultural adaptation. I've talked a bit about international students. 91% of international students report feeling some degree of culture shock. And a large number of people who migrate north are international students they do start out as international students, as indeed it was in my case. And on average, it takes about 6 months to a year to fully adjust to a new culture. And I want to pick on the word adjust there, because when it says it takes about 6 months to a year to adjust, what does that mean? From my experience, what it means is that you are able to become more aware of the differences within that culture. You cannot turn on the heater in your room without having to call somebody. You now know where to go get the food you want to eat and how to cook it and all of that. So you adjust to that culture. But remember, I also said that part of this is that you're finding new identities about yourself that you did not know. So you're having to adjust sometimes to change, to racism, for instance, to labeling, for instance, where what was once seen as a strength becomes something that is undervalued or devalued in the new culture, and you are adjusting to that. So adjusting to the new culture from within 6 to 1 month doesn't mean that you feel whole and safe, but that you just have a new understanding of how things are done there. But how you become fully a human being who is confident in themselves is a completely different story altogether. So I'll read you a few more quotes around how that experience feels. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, whom I earlier referred to, says the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but they are incomplete. Because, as I said, you're finding new identities about yourself. And your new village is defining you based on their perceptions about who you are, about what your personhood and your identity means. And that leads to stereotyping. But that stereotyping is incomplete. It is not a true identity of who you are, but you have to live within that framing, how your new environment frames you, which is very different. And that can be really disorienting for somebody who had a strong identity about their personhood and who they were. Taye Selassie says, I am not a national, I am a human being. It's not about where you're from, it's about where you are a local. And therefore, this idea about adjusting, are you a local or are you just passing through? Are you the other? Are you being otherized in this new place that you are? Because until you are a local, then you don't truly belong. And so one of the things that most diasporans find disorienting, sometimes second, third generation diasporans, is that question, where are you from? This idea that you don't really belong, that you're not local, that you're from somewhere else. And accepting, understanding that, and living in that truth, knowing that, but I belong here. This is home for me now. This is where my children are. This is a culture that we are part of now, and we want to be accepted fully in navigating that culture. And then you hear about this whole debate around multiculturalism. You know, should we have multicultures in these new areas that we belong? And you watch that on TV about you. And these people should. These people are. And who are these people? These people are you. These people are you. And you're listening about yourself in ways that do not edify, in ways that do not build you up, in ways that put you down, makes you less than. That's part of the adjustment that you make as a diasporan Here is another quote from Malidoma Patrisome. To heal the wounded soul requires a return to the indigenous soul, a rerouting in the wisdom of the ancestors. I read that again. To heal the wounded soul requires a return to the indigenous soul, a rerouting in the wisdom of the ancestors. That goes back to where we started from. This idea that culture is coded knowledge. It is what roots you. It's what centers you. It is that pedestal from which you leap, knowing that you understand and are fully aware of your environment and where you are and who you are. Ultimately, though, the encouragement is that you do find your space and you do find your sense of self and you define who you are, weaving together a tapestry that is multicultural, that is diverse, drawing upon what you want to add to you. You being the author, deciding what you want to leave behind, not what the culture around you determines, but what you want to leave behind. And ensuring that you're constantly growing to become this whole new self that you are in this new environment. And so James Baldwin says, perhaps home is not a place, but simply an irrevocable condition where, regardless of place, as a diasporan, you can call where you are home, the place that you belong. Thank you.